Rebirth. Unsatisfied desire for existence and sensual pleasures is the cause of rebirth. Buddhists regard the doctrine of rebirth not as a mere theory but as a verifiable fact. The acceptance of the truth about rebirth forms a fundamental tenet of Buddhism. However, the belief in rebirth is not confined to Buddhists. It is also found in other countries, in other religions, and even among free thinkers. Pythagoras could remember his previous birth. Plato could remember a number of his previous lives. According to Plato, human beings can be reborn only up to 10 times. Plato also believed in the possibility of rebirth in the animal kingdom. Among the ancient people in Egypt and China, a common belief was that only well-known personalities like emperors and kings have rebirths. A Christian authority named Origen, who lived in 185 to 254 CE, believed in rebirth. According to him, there is no eternal suffering in hell. Corina Bruno, who lived in the 16th century, believed that the soul of every man and animal transmigrates from one being to another. In 1788, the philosopher Kant criticized the teaching on eternal punishment. Kant also believed in the possibility of rebirth in other celestial bodies. Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860, another great philosopher, said that where the will to live existed there must be continuity of life. The will to live manifests itself successively in ever new forms. The Buddha explained this will to exist as the craving for existence. And of course the ancient sages of India taught about the transmigration of a soul from the earliest times. It is possible but not very easy for us to actually verify our past lives. The nature of mind is such that it does not allow most people the recollection of their previous lives. Our minds are overpowered by the 5 hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth, restlessness and doubt. Because of these hindrances, our vision is earthbound and hence we cannot visualize rebirths. Just as a mirror does not reflect an image when it is covered with dirt, so the mind does not allow most people the recollection of previous lives. We cannot see the stars during daytime, not because they are not there in the sky, but because they are outshone by the sunlight. Similarly, we cannot remember our past lives because our mind at present is always overburdened with many thoughts in the present day-to-day events and mundane circumstances. A consideration of the shortness of our lifespan on earth will help us to reflect on rebirth. If we consider life and its ultimate meaning and goal, and all the varied experience possible for a human being, we must conclude that in a single life there is not enough time for a person to carry out all that he or she can do or desires to do. The scale of experience and desire is infinite. There is a vast range of powers latent in human beings which we see and can even develop if the opportunity is presented to us. This is especially true today if special investigation is made. We find ourselves with high aspirations but with no time to attain them. Meanwhile, the great troop of passions and desires, selfish motives, and ambitions, make war within us and with others. These forces pursue each other to the time of our death. All these forces must be tried, conquered, subdued, and used. One life is just not enough for all this. To say that we must have but one life here with such possibilities put before us and impossible to develop is to make the universe and life a huge and cruel joke. The Buddhist doctrine of rebirth should be differentiated from the teachings of transmigration and reincarnation of other religions. Buddhism, unlike Hinduism, does not subscribe to the existence of a permanent, God-created soul or an unchanging entity that transmigrates from one life to another. Just as relative identity is made possible by causal continuity without a self or soul, so death can issue in rebirth without a transmigrating soul. In a single life, each thought moment flashes in and out of being, giving rise to its successor with its perishing. Strictly speaking, this momentary rise and fall of every thought is a birth and a death. Thus even in a single life we undergo countless births and deaths every second. But because the mental process continues with the support of a single physical body, we regard the mind-body continuum as constituting a single life. What we ordinarily mean by death is the cessation of the body's vital functions. When the physical body loses its vitality, it can no longer support the current of consciousness, the mental side of the process. But as long as there is a clinging to life, a desire to go on existing, the current of consciousness does not come to a stop with the body's loss of life. Rather, when death takes place, when the body dies away, the mental current, driven by the thirst for more existence, will spring up again with the support of a new physical body. One which comes into being through the meeting of sperm and egg. Thus, conception takes place immediately after death without a break. The stream of memory may be interrupted and the sense of identity transferred to the new situation. But the entire accumulation of experience and disposition has been transmitted to the new being. And the cycle of becoming begins to revolve for still another term. For Buddhism, therefore, death does not spell either the entrance to eternal life or complete annihilation. It is, rather, the portal to a new rebirth which will be followed by more growth, decay, and then another death. While there is a mental continuum, however, at the last moment, no renewed physical functioning occurs in a dying person's mind. This is just like a motorist releasing the accelerator before stopping, so that no more pulling power is given to the engine. Similarly, no more material qualities of karma arise. Buddhists do not maintain that the present life is the only life between two eternities of misery and happiness. Nor do they believe angels will carry them to heaven and leave them there for all eternity. They believe that this present life is only one of the indefinite numbers of states of being and that this earthly life is but one episode among many others. They believe that all beings will be reborn somewhere in some form for a limited period of time as long as their good and bad karma remains in the subconscious mind as mental energy. Although many eminent psychologists, like Carl Jung for example, have recognized the Buddhist teaching on the subject, the interpretation of the subconscious mind in the Buddhist context should not be confused with that given by modern psychologists, since the concepts are not exactly synonymous. What is the cause of rebirth? The Buddha taught that ignorance of the real nature of existence produces desires. Unsatisfied desire is the cause of rebirth. When all unsatisfied desire is extinguished, then rebirth ceases. To stop rebirth is to extinguish all desires. To extinguish desire, it is necessary to destroy ignorance. When ignorance is destroyed, the worthlessness of every such rebirth is perceived, as well as the paramount need to adopt a course of life by which the desire for such repeated births can be abolished. Ignorance also begets the illusory and illogical idea that there is only one existence for human beings, and the other illusion that this one life is followed by permanent states of eternal pleasure or torment. The Buddha taught that ignorance can be dispelled and sorrow removed by realization of the Four Noble Truths, and not through any other source. To eradicate all ignorance, one must persevere diligently in the practice of an all-embracing altruism in conduct, intelligence and wisdom. One must also destroy all desire for the lower, personal pleasures and selfish craving. How does rebirth take place? When this physical body is no more capable of functioning, energies do not die with it, but continue to take some other shape or form, which we call another life. The karmic force manifesting itself in the form of a human being can also manifest itself in the form of an animal. This can happen if a person has no chance to develop his or her positive karmic forces. This force, called craving, desire, volition, thirst to live, does not end with the non-functioning of the body but continues to manifest itself in another form, producing re-existence. This is called rebirth or rebecoming. Buddhists do not call it reincarnation because no permanent entity or soul moves from one life to the next. Today, there are people in various countries who have spontaneously developed the memory of their past births. The experiences of these people have been well documented in newspapers and periodicals. Some of these people never accepted that there was such a thing as rebirth until memory fragments of their previous lives came to them. Much of the information they revealed about their past lives has been investigated and found to be valid. Through hypnotism, some people have managed to reveal information of previous lives. Certain hypnotic states that penetrate into the subconscious mind make the recalling of past lives possible. Rebirth or becoming again and again is a natural occurrence not created by any particular religion or God. Belief in rebirth or disbelief does not make any difference to the process of rebirth or avoiding rebirth. Rebirth takes place as long as craving for existence and craving for sensual pleasures or attachment exist in the mind. Those strong mental forces prevail in each and every living being in this universe. Those who hope and pray that they be not born again must understand that their wishes will not materialize until they make earnest efforts to eradicate their craving and attachment from their minds. Having seen and experienced the uncertainty and unsatisfactoriness of life under worldly conditions, wise people try to rid themselves of these repeated births and deaths by following the correct path of mental purification. Those who cannot reduce their craving and attachment must be prepared to face all unsatisfactory and uncertain situations associated with rebirth and becoming again and again. Is rebirth simultaneous? Another difficult thing to understand about rebirth is whether rebirth occurs immediately upon the ending of the present life. This has been a controversial issue even amongst prominent Buddhist scholars. According to Abhidharma, rebirth, conception, takes place immediately after the death of a being without any intermediate state. At the same time, some others believe that a person, after death, would evolve into a spirit form for a certain number of days before rebirth takes place. Another interpretation regarding the same belief is that it is not the spirit, but the deceased person's consciousness or mental energy remaining in space, supported by its own mental energies of craving and attachment waiting until sooner or later rebirth takes place. The spirits, Pitas, who are beings born in spirit forms, are unfortunate living beings and their lives in the spirit form is not permanent. It is also a form of rebirth which is temporary. Another concept which many people cannot understand is that in the process of rebirth a person can be reborn as an animal and an animal can be reborn as a human. the animal nature of a person's mind and the animal way of life adopted by him or her can condition that person to be born as an animal. The condition and behavior of the mind is responsible for the next existence. On the other hand, a person who is born in animal form, owing to certain mental abuses during a previous birth, could be reborn as a human being, depending on the force of karma accumulated in a previous existence. It is a well-known fact that some animals are very intelligent and understanding, showing very human characteristics. A person who is born as an animal can again be born as a human being when the bad karma which conditioned his or her birth as an animal is expended and the dormant good karma which was stored in the consciousness has an opportunity to take effect. Dying moment. There are three types of consciousness: vijnana, functioning at the moment of death in a person; rebirth linking consciousness; padisandhisiddha. The current of passive consciousness or the current of life continuum, bhavanga, and consciousness disconnecting the present life, kutisiddha. At the last moment of a person's present life the padisandhisiddha or rebirth linking consciousness arises, having the three signs as its objects. The padisandhisiddha remains in the course of cognition for 5 faint thought moments or javana and then sinks down into bhavanga. At the end of bhavangath kutisiddha arises, disconnecting the present life and sinks down into bhavanga. At this very moment comes the end of the present life. At the end of that bhavanga another padisandhisiddha rises up in the next life and from this very moment the new life begins. This is the process of death and rebirth according to Buddhism, and only in Buddhism is the process of these natural phenomena found explained in minute and exact detail. A Buddhist faces death not as a crisis in life but as a normal event, for he or she knows that whoever is born must suffer, decay, and ultimately die. Or, as someone so aptly puts it, everyone is born with the certificate of death at birth. If we could all look at death in such an intelligent and rational way, we would not cling to life so tenaciously. After he was released from samsara at the moment of enlightenment, the Buddha declared, Ayamantimajaitai nathadani punabhavu. This is my final birth and there is no more rebirth for me. Dharmakaka Sutta.
Nirvana. Nirvana is the highest bliss, a supramundane state of eternal happiness. The happiness of nirvana cannot be experienced by indulging the senses but by calming them. Nirvana is the final goal of Buddhism. What is nirvana then? It is not easy to know what nirvana really is, it is easier to know what nirvana is not. Nirvana is not nothingness or extinction. Would the Buddha have left his family and kingdom and preached for 45 years all for nothingness? Nirvana is not a paradise. Several centuries after the Buddha, some of the Buddhist sects began to describe nirvana as a paradise. Their purpose of equating nirvana with a heavenly world was to convince the less intellectually gifted and to attract them to the teachings of the sect. Striving for nirvana came to mean looking for a nice place where everything is beautiful and where everyone is eternally happy. This might be a very comfortable folk tale, but it is not the nirvana that the Buddha experienced and described. During his time the Buddha did not deny the idea of paradise or heaven as it was presented in the early Indian religions. But the Buddha knew that this paradise was within samsara and the final liberation was beyond it. The Buddha could see that the path to nirvana led beyond the heavens. If nirvana is not a place, where is nirvana then? Strictly speaking, we cannot ask where nirvana is. Nirvana exists just as fire exists. There is no storage place for fire or for nirvana. But when you rub pieces of wood together, then the friction and heat are the proper conditions for fire to arise. Likewise, when the nature of a person's mind is such that he or she is free from all defilements, then nirvanic bliss will arise. Anyone can experience nirvana, but until one experiences the supreme state of nirvanic bliss, one can only speculate as to what it really is, although we can get glimpses of it in everyday life. For those who insist on the theory, the texts offer some help. The texts suggest that nirvana is a supramundane state of unalloyed happiness. By itself, nirvana is quite unexplainable and quite undefinable. As darkness can be explained only by its opposite, light, and as calm can only be explained by its opposite, motion, so likewise nirvana, as a state equated to the extinction of all suffering, can be explained by its opposite, the suffering that is being endured in samsara. As darkness prevails wherever there is no light, as calm prevails wherever there is no motion, so likewise nirvana is everywhere where suffering and change and impurity do not prevail. A sufferer who scratches his sores can experience a temporary relief. But this temporary relief will only aggravate the wounds and cause the disease to worsen. The joy of the final cure can hardly be compared to the fleeting relief obtained from the scratching. Likewise, satisfying the craving for sense desires brings only temporary gratification or happiness, which prolongs the journey in samsara. The cure for the samsaric disease is nirvana. Nirvana is an end of the cravings which cause all the sufferings of birth, old age, disease, death, grief, lamentation, and despair. The joy of nirvanic cure can hardly be compared to the temporary samsaric pleasure gained through fulfilling the sense desires. It is not advisable to speculate on what nirvana is. It is better to know how to prepare the conditions necessary for nirvana. How to attain the inner peace and clarity of vision that leads to nirvana. Follow the Buddha's advice, put his teachings into practice. Get rid of all defilements which are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. Purify yourself of all desires and realize absolute selflessness. Lead a life of right moral conduct and constantly practice meditation. By active exertion, free yourself from all selfishness and illusion. Then, nirvana is gained and experienced. Nirvana and samsara. A great Mahayana Buddhist scholar, Nagarjuna, says that samsara and nirvana are one. This interpretation can easily be misunderstood by others. However, to state that the concept of samsara and nirvana are the same is to say that there is no difference in voidness of component things and the unconditioned state of nirvana. In accordance with the Pali Tipitaka, samsara is described as the unbroken continuation of the 5 aggregates, 4 elements and 12 bases or sources of mental processes, whereas nirvana is described as the extinction of those relative physical and mental sources. Those who gain nirvanic bliss can experience it during the remainder of their lives as human beings. After their death, however, the link with those elements will be eliminated. For the simple reason that nirvana is unconditioned, not relative or interdependent. If there is to be anything at all after nirvana, it would have to be absolute truth. Nirvana is attainable in this present life. Buddhism does not state that its ultimate goal could be reached only in the life beyond. When nirvana is realized in this life with the body remaining, it is called sopadissa nirvana. When an arahant attains pari-nirvana, after the dissolution of the body, without any remainder of physical existence, it is called anupadissa pari-nirvana. One must learn to be detached from all worldly things. If there is any attachment to anyone or to anything, or if there is any aversion to anyone or anything, one will never attain nirvana. For nirvana is beyond all opposites of attachment and aversion, likes and dislikes. When that ultimate state is attained, one will fully understand this worldly life for which one now craves. This world will cease to be an object of desire. One will realize the sorrow and impermanence and impersonality of all that lives and that does not live. By depending on teachers or holy books without using one's own effort in the right manner, it is difficult to gain realization of nirvana. Dreams will vanish. No castles will be built in the air. The tempest will be ended. Struggles to avoid problems will be over. Nature's processes will have ceased. All worries, miseries, responsibilities, disturbances, burdens, physical and mental ailments and emotions will vanish after attaining this most blissful state of nirvana. To say that nirvana is nothingness simply because one cannot perceive it with the five senses, is as illogical as to say that light does not exist simply because the blind do not see it.
Law of Dependent Origination. No God, no Brahma can be found. No matter of this wheel of life. Just bare phenomena roll. Depending on conditions all. Visuddhimagga. The law of dependent origination is one of the most important teachings of the Buddha. And it is also very profound. The Buddha has often expressed his experience of enlightenment in one of two ways. Either in terms of having understood the Four Noble Truths, or in terms of having understood the nature of dependent origination. However, more people have heard about the Four Noble Truths and can discuss it than the law of dependent origination, which is just as important. Although the actual insight into dependent origination arises with spiritual maturity, it is still possible for us to understand the principle involved. The basis of dependent origination is that life or the world is built on a set of relations, in which the arising and cessation of factors depend on some other factors which condition them. This principle can be given in a short formula of 4 lines. When this is, that is. This arising, that arises. When this is not, that is not. This ceasing, that ceases. On this principle of interdependence and relativity rests the arising, continuity and cessation of existence. This principle is known as the law of dependent origination, or in Pali, Paticca Samuppada. This law emphasizes an important principle that all phenomena in this universe are relative, conditioned states which cannot arise independently of supportive conditions. A phenomenon arises because of a combination of conditions which are present to support its arising. And the phenomenon will cease when the conditions and components supporting its arising change and no longer sustain it. The presence of these supportive conditions, in turn, depend on other factors for their arising, sustenance and disappearance. The law of dependent origination is a realistic way of understanding the universe and is the Buddhist equivalent of Einstein's theory of relativity. The fact that everything is nothing more than a set of relations is consistent with the modern scientific view of the material world. Since everything is conditioned, relative, and interdependent, there is nothing in this world which could be regarded as a permanent or unique entity, variously regarded as an ego or an eternal soul, which many people believe in. The phenomenal world is built on a set of relations, but is this the way we normally understand the world to be? We create fictions of its permanency in our minds because of our desires. It is natural for human beings to cling to what they consider as beautiful or desirable, and to reject what is ugly or undesirable. being subjected to the forces of greed and hatred. They are misled by delusion, clouded by the illusion of the permanency of the object they cling to or reject. Therefore, it is hard for us to realize that the world is like a bubble or mirage, and is not the kind of reality we believe it to be. We do not realize that it is unreal in actuality. It is like a ball of fire, which when whirled around rapidly, can for a time, create the illusion of a circle. The fundamental principle at work in dependent origination is that of cause and effect. In dependent origination, what actually takes place in the causal process is described in detail. To illustrate the nature of dependent origination of the things around us, let us consider an oil lamp. The flame in an oil lamp burns dependent upon the oil and the wick. When the oil and the wick are present, the flame in an oil lamp burns. If either of these is absent, the flame will cease to burn. This example illustrates the principle of dependent origination with respect to a flame in an oil lamp. Or in an example of a plant, it is dependent upon the seed, earth, moisture, air, and sunlight for the plant to grow. All these phenomena themselves arise dependent upon a number of other causal factors, and not independently. Therefore it is impossible to conceive of a first cause. This is the principle of dependent origination. In the Dharma, we are interested to know how the principle of dependent origination is applied to the problem of suffering and rebirth. The issue is how dependent origination can explain why we are still going round in samsara, or explain the problem of suffering and how we can be free from suffering. It is not meant to be a description of the origin or evolution of the universe. Therefore, one must not be mistaken into assuming that ignorance, the first factor mentioned in the dependent origination, is the first cause. Since everything arises because of some preceding causes, there can be no first cause. According to the law of dependent origination, there are 12 factors which account for the continuity of existence birth after birth. They are: 1. Through ignorance are conditioned volitional actions or karma formations. 2. Through volitional actions is conditioned consciousness. 3. Through consciousness are conditioned mental and physical phenomena. 4. Through mental and physical phenomena are conditioned the 6 faculties, i.e., 5 physical sense organs and mind. 5. Through the 6 faculties is conditioned sensorial and mental contact. 6. Through sensorial and mental contact is conditioned sensation. 7. Through sensation is conditioned desire, thirst. 8. Through desire, thirst, is conditioned clinging. 9. Through clinging is conditioned the process of becoming. 10. Through the process of becoming is conditioned birth. 11. Through birth are conditioned decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. This is how life arises, exists, and continues, and how suffering arises. These factors may be understood as sequentially spanning a period of 3 lifetimes: the past life, the present life, and the future life. In the dependent origination, ignorance and mental formation belong to the past life, and represent the conditions that are responsible for the occurrence of this life. The following factors, namely, consciousness, mental and physical phenomena, the 6 senses, contact, sensation, desire, clinging and becoming, are factors involved in the present life. The last 2 factors, birth, and decay and death, belong to the future life. In this law, the first factor of ignorance gives rise to volitional activities, or karma. Ignorance means not knowing or understanding the true nature of our existence. Through ignorance, good or evil deeds are performed which will lead a person to be reborn. Rebirth can occur in various planes of existence, the human world, the celestial or higher planes, or even suffering planes depending of the quality of a person's karma. When a person dies, his or her volitional activities will condition the arising of consciousness. In this case to mean the relinking consciousness which arises as the first spark of a new life in the process of rebecoming. Once the relinking consciousness has taken place, life starts once again. Dependent on the consciousness, there arise mind and matter, that is, a new being is born. Because there are mind and matter, there arise the six sense organs, the sixth sense is the mind itself. With the arising of the sense organs, there arises contact. Contact with what? Contact with sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile objects, and mental objects. These sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile objects, and mental objects can be beautiful, pleasing, and enticing. On the other hand, they can be ugly and distasteful. Therefore, dependent on contact arises sensations, feelings that are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Because of these feelings, the laws of attraction, greed, and repulsion, aversion, are now set in motion. Beings are naturally attracted to pleasant objects and repelled by unpleasant objects. As a result of sensation, desire arises. A person desires and thirsts for forms that are beautiful and enticing. Sounds that are beautiful and enticing, tastes, smells, touch, and objects which the mind regards as beautiful and enticing. From these desires, he or she develops very strong clinging to the desirable object, or strongly rejects the repulsive object. Now because of this clinging and attachment, the next life is conditioned and there arises becoming. In other words, the processes of becoming are set in motion by clinging. The next link in this chain of dependent origination is that becoming conditions the arising of birth. And finally, dependent on birth arise decay and death, followed by sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. The process can be ceased if the formula is taken in the reverse order, through the complete cessation of ignorance, through the cultivation of insight and seeing the true nature of all phenomena. Volitional activities or karma formations cease, through the cessation of volitional activities, consciousness ceases. Through the cessation of birth, the other factors of decay, death, sorrow, etc., cease. Therefore, one can be free from the rounds of rebirth through the eradication of ignorance. To reiterate what was mentioned earlier, this doctrine of dependent origination merely explains the processes of birth and death, and is not a theory of the evolution of the world. It deals with the cause of rebirth and suffering, but in no way attempts to show the absolute origin of life. Ignorance in dependent origination is the ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. It is very important for us to understand the Four Noble Truths because it is the ignorance of these truths that has trapped us all in the endless cycle of birth and death. According to the Buddha, while he was speaking to Ananda, it is by their not being able to comprehend the dependent origination that people are entangled like a ball of cotton, and not being able to see the truth, are always afflicted by sorrow born often into conditions that are dismal and dreary, where confusion and prolonged suffering prevail. And they do not know how to disentangle themselves to get out. Eternalism and nihilism. The Buddha rejected both extremes of eternalism and nihilism. To develop right view or perfect view, we must first be aware of two views which are considered imperfect or wrong. The first view is eternalism. This doctrine or belief is concerned with eternal life or with eternal things. Before the Buddha's time, it was thought that there is an abiding entity which could exist forever, and that human beings can live the eternal life by preserving the eternal soul in order to be in union with the Supreme Being. In Buddhism, this teaching is called Sasataditha, the erroneous view of eternalists. Such views still exist even in the modern world owing to human beings craving for eternal life. Why did the Buddha refute the teaching of eternalism? Because when we understand the things of this world as they truly are, we cannot find anything which is permanent or which exists forever. Things change and continue to do so according to the changing conditions on which they depend. When we analyze things into their elements or into reality, we cannot find any abiding entity, any everlasting thing. This is why the eternalist view is considered wrong or false. The second false view is nihilism, or the view held by the nihilists who claim that there is no life after death. This view belongs to a materialistic philosophy which refuses to accept knowledge of mental conditionality. To subscribe to a philosophy of materialism is to understand life only partially. Nihilism ignores the side of life which is concerned with mental conditionality. If one claims that after the passing away or ceasing of a life, it does not come to be again, the continuity of mental conditions is denied. To understand life, we must consider all conditions, both mental and material. When we understand mental and material conditions, we cannot say that there is no life after death and that there is no further becoming after passing away. This nihilist view of existence is considered false because it is based on incomplete understanding of reality. That is why nihilism was also rejected by the Buddha. The teaching of karma proves that the Buddha did not teach annihilation after death. Buddhism accepts survival not in the sense of an eternal soul, but in the sense of a renewed becoming or mental continuum. Throughout the Buddha's long period of teaching the Dharma to his followers, he actively discouraged speculative arguments. During the 5th century BC, India was a veritable hive of intellectual activity where scholars, yogis, philosophers, kings, and even ordinary householders were constantly engaged in the philosophical arguments pertaining to human existence. Some of these were either ridiculously trivial or totally irrelevant. Some people wasted valuable time arguing at great length about all manner of subjects. They were far more concerned about proving their powers in mental gymnastics than seeking genuine solutions to the problems that beset humanity. In the 18th century, Jonathan Swift satirized a similar pastime in England when he showed the Lilliputians in Gulliver's Travels waging a war to decide whether an egg should be broken on its sharp end or its broad end. The Buddha also refused to get involved in speculations regarding the universe. He stated very clearly that the problem facing human beings is not in their past or future but in the immediate present. Knowledge about eternalism or nihilism can in no way help them to break the present fetters which bind them to existence and which are the source of all their feelings of discontent which arise from their inability to completely satisfy their cravings. The Buddha stated that before one can begin to tread the path which leads to nirvana, one must have right view. Only when one knows clearly what one is seeking will one be able to attain it.
Can the first cause be known? It is rather difficult for us to understand how the world came into existence without a first cause. But it is very much more difficult to understand how that first cause came into existence at the beginning. According to the Buddha, it is inconceivable to find a first cause for life or anything else. For in common experience, the cause becomes the effect and the effect becomes the cause. In the circle of cause and effect, a first cause is incomprehensible. With regard to the origin of life, the Buddha declares, without cognizable end is this recurrent wandering in samsara, cycle of birth and death. Beings are obstructed by ignorance and fettered by craving. A first beginning of these beings is not to be perceived. Animataga Samayutta in Samayutta Nikaya. This life stream flows on ad infinitum, as long as it is fed by the muddy waters of ignorance and craving. When these two are cut off, only then does the life stream cease to flow, only then does rebirth come to an end. It is difficult to conceive an end of space. It is difficult to conceive an eternal duration of what we call time. But it is more difficult to conceive time when there is no time. Likewise, it is rather difficult for us to understand how this world came into existence with a first cause. And it is more difficult to understand how that first cause came into existence at the beginning. For if the first cause can exist though uncreated, there is no reason why the other phenomena of the universe must not exist without having also been created. As to the question how all beings came into existence without a first cause, the Buddhist's reply is that there is no answer because the question itself is merely a product of human beings' limited comprehension. If we can understand the nature of time and relativity, we must see that there could not have been any first beginning. It can only be pointed out that all the usual answers to the question are fundamentally defective. If it is assumed that for a thing to exist, it must have had a creator who existed before it, it follows logically that the creator himself must have had a creator, and so on back to infinity. On the other hand, if the creator could exist without a prior cause in the form of another creator, the whole argument falls to the ground. The theory of a creator does not solve any problems, it only complicates the existing ones. Thus Buddhism does not pay much attention to theories and beliefs about the origin of the world. Whether the world was created by a god or it came into existence by itself makes little difference to Buddhists. Whether the world is finite or infinite also makes little difference. Instead of following this line of theoretical speculations, the Buddha advises people to grasp the fact that their present existence is suffering and to work hard to find their own salvation. Scientists have discovered many causes which are responsible for the existence of life, plants, planets, elements, and other energies. But it is impossible for human beings to find out any particular first cause for their existence. If they go on searching for the first cause of any existing life or thing, they point certain causes as the main cause, but that never becomes the first cause. In the process of searching for the first cause one after the other, they will come back to the place where they were. This is because cause becomes the effect, and the next moment that effect becomes the cause to produce another effect. That is why the Buddha says, a first cause is incomprehensible and the universe is beginningless.
Is there an eternal soul? Belief in an eternal soul is a misconception of the human consciousness. Soul theories. With regard to the soul theory, there are three kinds of teachers in the world. The first teacher teaches the existence of an eternal ego entity that outlasts death. He is the eternalist. The second teacher teaches a temporary ego entity which becomes annihilated at death. He is the materialist. The third teacher teaches neither an eternal nor a temporary ego entity, he is the Buddha. The Buddha teaches that what we call ego, self, soul, personality, etc., are merely conventional terms that do not refer to any real, independent entity. According to Buddhism, there is no reason to believe that there is an eternal soul that comes from heaven or is created by itself, or that it will transmigrate or proceed straight away either to heaven or hell after death. Buddhists cannot accept that there is anything either in this world or any other world that is eternal or unchangeable. We only cling to ourselves and hope to find something immortal. We are like children who wish to grasp a rainbow. To children, a rainbow is something vivid and real, but grown-ups know that it is merely an illusion caused by certain rays of light and drops of water. The colors are only a series of waves or undulations that have no more reality than the rainbow itself. We have done well without discovering the soul. We show no signs of fatigue or degeneration for not having encountered any soul. No one has produced anything to promote the human race by postulating a soul and its imaginary working. Searching for a soul in man is like searching for something in a dark, empty room. But the poor person will never realize that what is being sought for is not in that room. It is very difficult to make such a person understand the futility of the search. Those who believe in the existence of a soul are not in a position to explain what and where it is. The Buddha's advice is not to waste our time over this unnecessary speculation and devote our time to understand reality. When we have attained perfection, then we will be able to realize whether there is a soul or not. A wandering ascetic named Vakagata asked the Buddha whether there was an Atman, self/soul, or not. The story is as follows. Vakagata comes to the Buddha and asks, "Venerable Gautama, is there an Atman?" The Buddha is silent. Then, "Venerable Gautama, is there no Atman?" Again the Buddha is silent. Vakagata gets up and goes away. After the ascetic has left, Ananda asks the Buddha why he did not answer Vakagata's question. The Buddha explains his position. Ananda, when asked by Vakagata, the wanderer, "Is there a self?" If I had answered, "There is a self," then, Ananda, that would be siding with those recluses and brahmanas who hold the eternalist theory, Sasataveda. And Ananda, when asked by the wanderer, "Is there no self?" if I had answered, "There is no self," then that would be siding with those recluses and brahmanas who hold the annihilationist theory, Aksadavada. Again, Ananda, when asked by Vakagata, "Is there a self?" if I had answered, "There is a self," would that be in accordance with my knowledge that all dharmas are without self? Surely not, sir. And again, Ananda, when asked by the wanderer, "Is there no self?" if I had answered, "There is no self," then that would have created a greater confusion in the already confused Vakagata. For he would have thought, "Formerly indeed I had an Atman, self, but now I haven't got one, Samayutta Nikaya." The Buddha regarded soul speculation as illusory. He once said, "Only through ignorance and delusion do human beings indulge in the dream that their souls are separate and self-existing entities. Their heart still clings to self. They are anxious about heaven and they seek the pleasure of self in heaven. Thus they cannot see the bliss of righteousness and the immortality of truth. Selfish ideas appear in human beings' minds due to their conception of self and craving for existence. Anatta, the teaching of no soul. The Buddha countered all soul theory and soul speculation with his anatta doctrine. Anatta is translated under various labels: no soul, no self, no ego. To understand the anatta doctrine, one must understand that the eternal soul theory, I have a soul, and the material theory, I have no soul, are both obstacles to self-realization or salvation. They arise from the misconception I am. Hence, to understand the anatta doctrine, one must not cling to any opinion or views on soul theory, rather, one must try to see things objectively as they are and without any mental projections. One must learn to see the so-called I or soul or self for what it really is, merely a combination of changing forces. This requires some analytical explanation. The Buddha taught that what we conceive as something eternal within us, is merely a combination of physical and mental aggregates or forces, pancakhandha, made up of body or matter, rupakhandha, sensation, vedanakhandha, perception, sunakhandha, mental formations, samkarakhandha, and consciousness, vinanakhandha. These forces are working together in a flux of momentary change. They are never the same for two consecutive moments. They are the component forces of the psychophysical life. When the Buddha analyzed the psychophysical life, he found only these five aggregates or forces. He did not find any eternal soul. However, many people still have the misconception that the soul is the consciousness. The Buddha declared in unequivocal terms that consciousness arises dependent on matter, sensation, perception, and mental formations, and that it cannot exist independently of them. The Buddha said, "The body, O monks, is not the self. Sensation is not the self. Perception is not the self. The mental constructions are not the self. And neither is consciousness the self." Perceiving this, O monks, the disciple sets no value on the body, or on sensation, or on perception, or on mental constructions, or on consciousness. Setting no value on them, he becomes free of passions and he is liberated. The knowledge of liberation arises there within him. And then he knows that he has done what has to be done, that he has lived the holy life, that he is no longer becoming this or that his rebirth is destroyed. Anattalakhana Sutra. The Anatta doctrine of the Buddha is over 2,500 years old. Today the thought current of the modern scientific world is flowing towards the Buddha's teaching of anatta or no soul. In the eyes of modern scientists, a human being is merely a bundle of ever-changing sensations. Modern physicists say that the apparently solid universe is not, in reality, composed of solid substance at all, but is actually a flux of energy. The modern physicist sees the whole universe as a process of transformation of various forces, which include the processes which constitute a human being. The Buddha was the first to realize this. W.S. Wiley, an author, once said, "The existence of the immortal in human beings is becoming increasingly discredited under the influence of the dominant schools of modern thought." The belief in the immortality of the soul is a dogma that is contradicted by the most clear, empirical investigation. The mere belief in an immortal soul, or the conviction that something in us survives death, does not make us immortal unless we know what it is that survives and that we are capable of identifying ourselves with it. Most human beings choose death instead of immortality by identifying themselves with that which is perishable and impermanent, by clinging stubbornly to the body or the momentary elements of the present personality, which they mistake for the soul or the essential form of life. In reference to those researches of modern scientists who are now more inclined to assert that the so-called soul is no more than a bundle of sensations, emotions, sentiments, all relating to the physical experiences, Prof. William James says that the term soul is a mere figure of speech to which no reality corresponds. It is the same anatta doctrine of the Buddha that was introduced in the Mahayana school of Buddhism as sunyata or voidness. Although this concept was elaborated by a great Mahayana scholar, Nagarjuna, by giving various interpretations, there is no extraordinary concept in sunyata that is far different from the Buddha's original doctrine of anatta. The belief in soul or self and the Creator God is so strongly rooted in the minds of many people that they cannot imagine why the Buddha did not accept these two concepts, which are indispensable to many religions. In fact, some people get a shock or become nervous and emotional when they hear that the Buddha rejected these two concepts. That is the main reason why to many unbiased scholars and psychologists Buddhism stands unique when compared to all the other religions. At the same time, some other scholars who appreciate the various other aspects of Buddhism are convinced that Buddhism would be enriched by deliberately reinterpreting the Buddha word atta in order to introduce the concept of soul and self into Buddhism. The Buddha was aware of this unsatisfactoriness of humanity and the conceptual upheaval regarding this belief. All conditioned things are impermanent. All conditioned things are dukkha suffering. All conditioned or unconditioned things, dharma, are soulless or selfless. Dhammapada 277, 278, 279. There is a parable in our Buddhist texts with regard to the belief in an eternal soul. A man, who mistook a moving rope for a snake, became terrified by that fear in his mind. Upon discovery that it was only a piece of rope, his fear subsided and his mind became peaceful. The belief in an eternal soul is equated to the rope man's imagination.